So let's talk about neuro-linguistic programming, right? NLP. It has this huge reputation as this super powerful tool for personal change. You hear about it for everything from, breaking bad habits all the way to having these massive life breakthroughs. But here's the real question, the one that kind of hangs in the air. It's not if it works, it's why does it work so well sometimes, and then other times it just completely falls flat. So let's really dive into that puzzle.
All right, to really get to the bottom of this, we've got to start by looking at the kind of weird space that NLP occupies. I mean, where does it actually fit in the world of personal development or psychology?
It's funny, NLP is almost defined more by what it isn't than what it is. It's not some formal psychological theory, it's not a neurological model, and it's definitely not a hard science. But it's not just a bunch of stories, either. It was literally born from just watching what worked, what actually created change in the real world. So it lives in this interesting gap, right, between formal science and just practical, hands-on application.
And this right here brings us to the absolute core of the problem. See, NLP got really good at creating techniques based on patterns they observed. Insanely good. But it never took that next crucial step. It never explained the underlying system that it was interacting with. It gave us the what to do, but it totally skipped the most important question. What is actually being done, and what is it being done to?
Okay, let's dig into that idea a little more. Because this difference between just seeing a pattern and truly understanding the structure behind it, well, that's the whole key to unlocking this thing.
This really breaks it down perfectly. A pattern that tells you what tends to happen. It's like a recipe, right? If you do X, Y will probably happen. But a structure that explains why it must happen. It's the chemistry. It tells you why those ingredients, when you put them together in that way, have to create that result, and just as importantly, when they can't. And NLP is absolutely packed with powerful patterns, but it's missing that deep structural explanation.
And look, because the whole model is built on patterns instead of structure, it can't tell you its own limits. It doesn't know when to stop. And that's exactly why so much of NLP comes down to the artistry or the intuition of the person using it. They have to kind of feel it out, They have to implicitly sense when a technique is going to land and when it's going to be a total dud, because the model itself, it's not going to give them any clues.
Okay, so if NLP is the toolbox, but it's not the blueprint for the engine it's supposed to be fixing, then what is that missing blueprint? What is the missing layer in this whole puzzle?
The answer, it turns out, is a framework called structural cognition. This is the missing piece. It's the underlying architecture that NLP has been poking and prodding this whole time, without ever actually giving it a name. So what structural cognition does is it completely flips the question. We stop asking, okay, which NLP technique should I use, and we start asking something way more fundamental. What cognitive structure can this person's system even support right now? It finally gives us a name and a map for the system that NLP was always trying to influence.
And what's cool is that this framework gives us a much more precise language. We can suddenly talk about real things like cognitive load. Is the system totally overwhelmed? We can talk about coherence capacity, like how fragmented are their internal maps of the world. And, this is the big one, we can ask if the system is structurally ready for a change. These aren't vague ideas anymore. These are variables that actually make the results of NLP predictable.
All right, so now we have this new lens, right? This idea of structural cognition. And with it, we can finally solve that central mystery. We can actually understand, with incredible clarity, why the exact same NLP technique can be absolutely life-changing for one person and then do absolutely nothing for the next.
So here's when it works. It's when a person's cognitive load is manageable, when their core sense of who they are isn't under threat, and when their whole system is already close to a tipping point for change. Then, yeah, NLP techniques work like magic. A reframe lands perfectly. An anchor holds strong. But here's the key. The technique isn't creating the change out of thin air, it's just showing up at the exact right moment when the system is structurally able to reorganize itself.
And then, here's the other side of that coin. If someone's system is just totally overloaded, if their sense of identity is desperately fighting just to hold itself together, that very same NLP technique is going to fail. Hard. A reframe suddenly feels invalidating, even insulting. An anchor just dissolves into nothing in seconds. The problem was never the technique. The problem was that the underlying cognitive structure was never in a viable state for that intervention to begin with.
So think about it. When you see one of those master NLP practitioners, the ones who seem to have this magical intuition, they throw the script away, they just sense the perfect moment to say something. They're not using magic. What they're doing is implicitly sensing that underlying cognitive structure. They're feeling out the load, the coherence, and the stability of the system that's right there in front of them.
So where does all this leave NLP? You might think this kind of diminishes it, right? But it doesn't. Not at all. In fact, it does the opposite. It finally gives it a proper home. It makes this incredibly powerful tool understandable.
Look, structural cognition doesn't invalidate NLP. It just explains how it actually works. And that makes it safer. It makes it more precise. It takes away some of the weird mystique. It means a practitioner can finally understand why a technique worked or why it failed, and, maybe most importantly, when the right move is to not intervene at all.
This right here, this captures such a subtle but really profound shift in perspective. For the longest time, the story was that NLP was this model that could explain cognition, how our minds work. But the new view, it's the total opposite. It's that a proper model of cognition is what finally explains NLP. NLP just becomes one of many tools and phenomena that a really solid model of the mind can finally make sense of.
So, if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's this. The absolute genius of NLP was in discovering that our experience can be changed by language, by where we put our attention, by the way we represent things. That was huge. What structural cognition does is provide the long-lost user manual. It explains the fundamental principles of the mind that make any of that even possible in the first place. And once you see that, well, you'll never look at NLP the same way again.